Hi, welcome to everyone who is arriving in this CSW69 event. Aaron, I think it's over to you. So I'm going to hand over at this point. Do please let me know if there's any problems with technical issues or so on, and I will endeavour to resolve it. But in the meantime, I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Karen Wong-Perez, who is a senior researcher at the International Institute for Environment and Development. Thanks.
Thank you, Matt. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone joining us today from across the world. It is a real privilege to welcome you to this virtual parallel event on advancing data for synergies between gender, climate, and environment as part of CSW69. This event is the result of the common interest of numerous member organizations of the Gender and Environment Data Alliance, GEDA, IIED, the International Institute for Environment and Development, the CBD Women Caucus, UN Women, and the Feminist Action Coalition, Feminist Action for Climate Justice Coalition to close the data gap and advance gender and environment synergies. It is an honor to open this discussion alongside such a diverse and brilliant group of speakers, leaders from women's organizations, researchers, and policymakers, all working on data at the intersection of gender, climate, and environmental justice. As we gather for Beijing Plus 30, we are called to reflect on 3 decades of progress and to identify the persistent gaps in gender equality. But how can we assess progress if we lack the data to see the full picture? How do we drive change when some lived realities remain invisible and solutions remain siloed? And how, in our current global political context, can this data help us not only to prevent any rollback of women's rights, but to recalibrate our path towards a more holistic vision of gender justice? Today, we're here to challenge these gaps. We understand data not just about numbers, figures, and facts, but about voice, agency, and power. When often overlooked segments of society are empowered to generate and use their own data, and when governments integrate diverse yet comparable data sources to complement national statistics, we truly advance the whole of society ambition of the 2030 Agenda and the 3 Rio Conventions. This event sets the stage for our in-person side event that will be held on Friday, the 21st of March at CSW next week, which is co-sponsored by Chile, Mexico, Colombia, Canada, and Ireland, where we will share the insights gathered today to the policy level with member state involvement. This first event focuses on amplifying grassroots perspectives, showcasing community-led data collection, and exploring opportunities for complementarity between state and non-state actors' data systems. Today, we will hear directly from grassroots organizations exploring how community-driven data can reshape decision-making, the challenges faced, and the enablers that support their work. Then, through an interactive Mentimeter session, we will gather your insights to shape concrete recommendations for the in-person event next week. We will hear institutional perspectives on how state and non-state actors can work together for stronger, more inclusive data systems. And we will close with an ambitious call to action to collate key asks and recommendations. We are very excited to have you all here, and we look forward to a rich and meaningful discussion. And without further ado, I'm thrilled to introduce and hand over to our moderator, Ivana Feldeber from DataGénero. Thank you.
Hi, Karen. Thank you so much for passing me the words to speak here. I am going to be moderating this next panel on grassroots perspectives, data collection, and use in practice. So this panel brings together leaders from grassroots and social movements to share key enablers, challenges, and best practices in community-driven gender data collection. After the discussion, we encourage everyone to ask questions during the Q&A and make a dynamic exchange of ideas. So now I will introduce our first panelist. Welcome Rachel Kagoiya, Director of GROOTS Kenya and FACJ Action Coalition.
Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of us. And thank you, really a great opportunity to be joining this amazing conversation, a must-have conversation as we are reflecting on Beijing Plus 30. So GROOTS Kenya is a national movement of over 5,000 grassroots women-led, and community-based organizations and self-help groups in Kenya. Were founded in 1995, around the same time when we had the 4th UN Conference on Women in Beijing in China. And so as we are commemorating the 30 years of Beijing, GROOTS Kenya is also celebrating 30 years of existence. And so the whole year is a moment for us to reflect, but also to reaffirm our mission, our conviction, our strategy, and our commitment, and why we really exist is to facilitate meaningful and effective engagement of grassroots women and girls in development processes and decision-making forums that impact them and their communities. Now, we use that tried and tested model, and we call it the champion-led model. And these are grassroots women. So the grassroots women also are known as champions. And these are experts and leaders in communities, and they have an in-depth understanding of their local context. They possess deep knowledge of priority issues and needs within their communities. We involve them in the co-designing and co-implementing, co-tracking and co-reporting on many issues and initiatives happening in the community that are also relevant, and to make sure that they're impactful and sustained way beyond the project. Now, GROOTS Kenya strengthens their capacities, amplifies their efforts wherever they are, involving them in decision-making processes, ensuring that their voices are heard and included. But also we work very closely with the county and national governments through dialogues and consultations, so that we are just not doing collaboration, but we're also holding them accountable to the commitment and policy changes that impact on the grassroots communities. Now, when we talk about data collection and data use, allow me just to start by sharing and asking ourselves why data matters, particularly from a grassroots perspective. Now, data is evidence. Data is proof of claim. Data supports us in terms of being able to measure and say, this is the impact of the work that we are doing. Now, for grassroots women, data also becomes a useful tool and platform to be able to tell their own stories in their own ways, in their own languages, leveraging on their lived experiences and expertise, being able to define the challenges that they experience, but also the solution that they are also improvising in their communities. Grassroots women-led organizations and groups, they take charge of their development by defining the problem, conceptualizing the solution, designing and implementing interventions, and also tracking the change, like I said, for accountability's sake. Because we understand and we appreciate no one truly understands the needs of grassroots men better than they can. And so data presents this tool that visibilizes and amplifies their voices and personal and collective agency, but also becomes a foundation for decision-making, for advocacy, and for creating lasting change. There's many ways that GROOTS Kenya has been collecting data and using data in the last couple of years. And allow me just to share a few. In the interest of time, I'll just share a few. Grassroots women, we must appreciate and acknowledge that they are producers, that they are also data users, they are data analysts, they are data providers. And these are grassroots women in all their diversities, in their ways of being and their ways of doing. They actually are data itself. And so for many years, grassroots women have been collecting, they have been analyzing and using community data on issues from land rights, from issues to education and health and economic resilience, name it, many issues. And so GROOTS Kenya has been working with our champions to be able to collect that data, but also use that data for influencing policy and also for accountability. Now, I'll give you an example. The Kenya Demographic Housing Survey, we call it the Kenya KDHS. In 2022, this is the official data that the government puts together. In 2022, they told us that 25% of women who own agricultural land, only 3% own land individually, and 22% own land jointly with their spouses or partners. And only 7% of women own non-agricultural land. Yet, 70% of Kenyan women are contributing to the labor workforce of these lands. Already the data is shouting, the data is screaming, it's saying there is an anomaly, because how do we have the ownership having only 3%, but in terms of the workforce and the labor that is put into this land is over 70%. And so this becomes a moment for us to use it for advocacy, to influence for ownership of land for women, to initiate advocacy for the need to make sure that women do not only own land, but they are also able to access and use land. Now, we have put together a toolkit together with the UN Women last year. We call it Unlocking the Value of Gender Data, and I'll be sharing the link shortly on the chat. But this is a toolkit that helps us to be able to unpack the different ways that we can unlock the use of gender data for advocacy, for policy change, for decision making. At the Secretariat, GROOTS Kenya, like I said, is a movement. At the Secretariat that provides the technical support, we have also been using gender data. We've been using data for programming and for responding, for instance, to issues around gender-based violence. We have champions who are called GBV responders. They collect data from the communities using a tool called Kobo Tool. It's an open source tool. They are able to input the data as they map and identify survivors of gender-based violence. And on a quarterly basis, this data becomes a point of reference to be able to reflect and to think, how do we provide the wraparound services for GBV survivors, whether it's providing safe houses, whether it's psychosocial support and medical support, whether it's justice, pursuing justice and legal aid. Now, between September 2024 and March 2025, which is a span of like 6 months.
If you could start wrapping up a little bit.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Ivana. GBV responders in Kakamega, Kiambu, and Tana River have responded to 2,506 GBV survivors. So really emphasizing the need for being able to use data, but data that is available. We have used data also to influence for budget cycles. This country, influencing for public finance management and participatory. And one quote that I want just to end with is one quote that Champion gave. And she said, "We, the grassroots women, decide to begin generating our localized data based on the specific needs of a specific intervention. This data is powerful. It's real-time and highly contextualized. It is the kind of evidence that has equipped us with content for public participation. We're able to share our views in government planning meetings and support our arguments with our strong data." And the last thing is just to say the call to action from grassroots perspective is really to say, for us to be able to invest in data, gender data, because it costs money to make women count. It costs money to make women count. So we need to avail the resources. We need to make sure that we're institutionalizing gender data, gender disaggregated data, not just at the institution, but also at the community. And we need to trust grassroots women with the data that they are also producing. So we have the official data, but we also have the citizen-generated data that is generated by the grassroots women based on their lived experiences and their expertise in the communities. I thank you, and back to you, Ivana.
Thank you so much, Rachel. I could hear you speaking all day, but I am the timekeeper, unfortunately. It was really, really good and rich, everything that you said. It's really important to trust on data and to build it and to put money into it, as you said in the last part. So now I will present Zoneziwoh Mbondgulo-Wondieh. I hope I said it right. I practiced it a lot, and I will give the floor to you. She's from Women for a Change, Cameroon, and also part of FACJ Action Coalition.
Thank you very much, and happy anniversary to Grassroots Kenya. I mean, this year is definitely a year of multiple celebration, a year of, women's power, a year of legacy, and a year of, resilience to the struggle. So for me, at Women for a Change, we are a feminist advocacy organization that works at the intersection of gender, climate, and health. And we work at multiple levels, so both at the community level, at the national, regional, and also at the global level, like, the CSW. And often we see ourselves, as data living data, because what we do, what we advocate for is not alien. This is issues that affect our lives on a day-to-day basis. And we consider ourselves as that living proof of the impact of the work towards advancing women. So what do I mean by when I say we consider ourselves as data? For instance, when we get in a meeting and we talk about, experience of climate disasters like flood, we are not just speaking something that we read, but we are speaking what we are living. If we say, my home was destroyed by the rain that happened yesterday and that of my neighbor, these are statistics we are providing, but in an alternative way. So citizen generated data from the perspective of a woman, often, sometimes, within the policy spaces might not be considered as data, but to some extent, these are data based on individuals' realities and perspective. And like Rachel said, for sure, we need to trust these women because it is their reality. What is data, and what kind of data are we trying to capture? That is one. And two, as a result of the work that we do, which we believe that it's, for us and with us, that has been able also to open access and provided opportunities where women are part of conversations at the community level, where they're able to engage using their own stories, using their realities to shape the discussions that are happening at the community level. An example I'm going to share is, recently there have been severe incidents of floods happening across the country. And there was a communique that was released calling for an emergency evacuation. And this communique was released, from the hierarchy, from the capital city, from the ministry, and they're demanding that everybody should just be evacuated from that region. And the women decided to come together and things don't happen that way. Before, evacuating, there should be measures that, needs to be put in place. And through that, there was, an organizing of a policy dialogue, a town hall meeting with the officials of that community. And the result was really formidable in the sense that this communique was designed with that consultation of the people who are directly impacted. But then through that dialogue and through that town hall, there was some rethinking around the discussion on how evacuation should happen. And ever since, these women have been part of the discussion. And it's just an initiative that women came together and we need to really have a discussion with our decision makers, just so they understand what it means and what the experiences feels like. And that was an impact. And through that, they have been, involved in discussions around how to better plan and avert incidences like that. So that is data. But then maybe in the policy spaces, you will hear statistics in terms of numbers and in terms of figures. But for these women, to them, this is data. And for us, that is data. That is one. Then two, in terms of how does this conversation then fits into what is happening at the global level. We are here at New York. This is an event we are partaking, and we are sharing our stories, and we are able to, learn from each other. And for instance, just listening to Russia, how they organize, how grassroots has kept that momentum for so long. Those are inspirational moments that we take back home and we also exchange. And this is how we do it in Cameroon. This is how we do it in our communities. This is how we do it, at a local scale. And regardless of the level of education, but to some extent, this is what we do. So those are moments of learning. We connect with the global and also take the global back to the local to see that we build that momentum and keep the conversation alive. So I think I would just want to wrap up into saying that as call for action, there is interconnectivity. One, the local cannot exist without the global, and the global is informed by the local. So we need that intersectional conversation to constantly, in terms of addressing issues on injustice on women. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your intervention. It was really, really rich and great. I will go now to Sadia Satti from Sustainable Development Policy Institute in Pakistan.
Thank you so much, Ivana, and hello, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. I'm really very happy to part of this side event when we are celebrating Beijing 30 plus. So coming to the today's topic, as talking about the women environment and climate nexus. If I look into the SDG 5 progress globally, so none of the SDG indicators have been fully achieved till now, whether it's SDG 5 or filling this with the SDG 13, 17, none of these SDGs are achieved. Or coming to the regional perspective, if we look into the regions in global south, for example, if we look into the Africa, major challenges still persist with progress stagnating in SDG 5. Likewise, in South Asia, the region faced significant challenge with the progress moderately increasing, but there is some advancement like in education or legal reforms, but the SDG 5 indicators are constantly decreasing. So coming to the climate change impacts, as we know, I'm coming from very climate vulnerable country, like from Pakistan. We have experienced the floods in 2022 that almost 30 plus million people were affected due to the floods. But when it comes to the data, we don't have gender desegregated data available till now. If we don't have the data, we cannot, know how many women they hit by the and affected by the floods, whether it's economic losses or whether their health were on the stake or anything else. So in global south countries like India, like Brazil, like Nigeria, they have some recent incidents of climate disasters, and women are more vulnerable in these areas. Talking about the agriculture sector, as you know, women in global south are heavily involved in agriculture, which is severely impacted by the climate changes. Droughts and floods led to reduced agriculture productivity, affecting women's financial resources and household incomes. Another major challenges which women face, that is the energy poverty. So research shows that about 1/3 of the global population in global south lacks the electricity, which ultimately restricts women from their financial resources and household incomes. So talking about the role of data, that is very important. For example, there is a project in Argentina by UNDP, decentralized grassroots data collection, where they involve the youth volunteers to collect data. That is also saving money. So these kind of mechanism and models can be adopted in the global south countries, where this will beneficial the women empowerment. This will help in the community engagement, and also save the indigenous knowledge, which is very to combat the climate change, we should come to the localized solutions. So collecting gender desegregated data will help highlight the impact of climate change on women, particularly those from small-scale agriculture or resource-dependent livelihood. For example, women in Africa often face vulnerabilities due to the poverty, ill health, and food insecurity. So these adoption strategies can be adopted. So such data can inform gender-responsive policies and address structural inequalities, such as access to the land, credit, and education, which is very important for building the resilience. And the grassroots data can help in policymakers understand the specific need and challenges faced by the local communities, especially when in the context of climate change. I think UN Climate Change has reported that now 85% of countries, they include the gender in their climate policies. And now when countries, almost some of countries have submitted their NDCs, but some are working on their NDCs. So I think integrating gender perspective and integrating the grassroots data collection in their NDCs for the more localized solution would be the key for climate resilience economy also. So another role which is enhancing adaptive capacity. So by providing insights into the local condition and the experience, grassroots data can enhance communities' adapted capacity and climate change. And this is particularly important for the women who often bear the brunt of the climate impact due to the existing social inequalities in the global south. So this will also help in promoting the gender equality. So because collecting the grassroots data can highlight the gender disparities in the access of resources, decision making, and economic opportunities. This information will be essential for designing an intervention that promote gender equality and empowered women in the climate action. And other role which we can see is of the grassroots data collection that could be the supporting community-led initiatives. For example, grassroots data will support community-led initiatives by providing evidence of their effectiveness, and this can attract the funding and support for the local projects that address gender and climate change simultaneously. So I'll not take much time. We'll just conclude from some of the key points, like investing in grassroots data collection is very important to support local organization and collection of the and analyze of the grassroots data to ensure informed policy decision and community initiatives. So one point is the financing, climate financing for the grassroots data collection. Then the promoting the gender responsive policies. So these grassroots data can be advocate for the policies that address gender disparities in climate action and ensure equal participation of women in decision making, particularly countries in global south. And lastly, empowering community-led initiatives like by providing resources and recognition to the grassroots projects that effectively integrate gender and climate change considerations will enhance their impact and scalability. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sadia. Really important issues that were also some of them mentioned before, like the youth involvement and also the investment in these initiatives and also supporting local movements. Now I will pass it on to Tahnee Pryor from Women of the Arctic. Welcome, Tahnee.
Thank you so much. Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me here today. My name is Tahnee Pryor. I co-lead an extremely small nonprofit called Women of the Arctic, which is based out of Finland. I'm sharing a photograph here of some of the many faces that have attended some of our events, because it's not just myself and my face that should be highlighted here. So I wanted to bring them in. We're an organization that focuses on issues of gender equality and women's issues specifically in the Arctic, which is the top of the world, so a bit different from some of the other speakers here. But nevertheless, we do a lot of work that seeks to bring together women both virtually and in person, many of them researchers who themselves focus on different issue areas in the circumpolar north, including data-related issues. And in addition to that, we've also focused on two separate projects that focus on data in the Arctic, and I thought I would share some of the output that we have from that today. Kind of to provide a quick context of the Arctic is often seen as a harbinger for what's to come. You know, it's warming at nearly 4 times the global rate. It's also a really interesting region because it cuts across 8 different states. So Canada, Finland, Greenland, through Denmark, Iceland, Norway, Russia, Sweden, and the United States, which means that any questions related to data in this area can at times become slightly counterintuitive to what we think might be happening. For example, even though a bunch of these Arctic states score really high on the Global Gender Gap Report, Iceland, Norway, Finland, Sweden, they all scored in the top 4. But we have very little data that can show us what the gender dynamics are between the north and the southern parts of those states. So what we see from the little that we do have is that the experiences in the North are actually quite different, in that they're probably more similar to one another across the different countries. And sometimes they might even be quite similar to what our colleagues have shared in the Global South. Notably, Arctic governance also does not prioritize gender equality, and its goal has not been fulfilled within the region, even if it is successful in other parts of those states. So I thought I would explore a little bit of what the state of gender and data is in the Arctic. There was a report that came out in 2021 called the Pan-Arctic Report on Gender Equality in the Arctic, which was the first report of its kind to cut across different themes, everything from empowerment, law and governance, and environment, to look at what the state is of the data that we have. And what we found really is that there is a very large paucity of gender data in the Arctic. And the data that we do have is actually quite fragmented. And you're going to see that this is a bit of a theme, fragmentation. A lot of the knowledge that we have is based on individual case studies, and they don't necessarily provide a comprehensive overview of what's going on. So you might have something on fisheries in Alaska and Iceland and Norway, but you're missing it for the other countries. So this brings about some challenges both for our analysis and in terms of comparisons and in terms of developing good decision-making and policies. We're also seeing power imbalances. So you have a colonial past, there's a recognition of gender and women as important in certain contexts, but not necessarily in others. There's also been shifts in how communities have understood gender through the process of colonization. And so there's a lot of wrestling there. And now more so than ever, you also see, the geopolitical context shifting. In terms of the state of gender and environment data specifically, while the global scholarship is really growing, much of the excellent work has been in the Global South, and there's a limited applicability to the Arctic context specifically. So really, we've been wanting to focus on developing kind of an Arctic-specific understanding of the environmental change experience. What we have seen is that in the research that's come out that's been quite groundbreaking in the last 20 to 30 years, there's often been a male bias. So you've often seen the integration of observations from hunters, from fishers, folks who live and work on the land, but not so much from the women's perspective. So this is something that we've been trying to understand, and we've been trying to understand why this might be happening. So in another project that we're working on, which is called Arctic Passion, it focuses on hopefully developing a pan-Arctic observing system. So trying to look at all of the different satellite-based systems, but also in situ observations and community-based observing that is occurring, and trying to understand how you can actually make that interoperable. Because what we're finding is that the data that we have doesn't necessarily speak to one another, because different countries tend to collect different type of statistics. Some actually collect things on ethnicity or gender, others do not. So they don't necessarily speak to one another. And oftentimes they're not very friendly to the integration of community-based observations. So a lot of indigenous communities in the North, their knowledge, which has been integral since time immemorial, and there's a lot of informal networks developed to gather that, necessarily been easily included. So as a part of those conversations, we've noted some additional challenges. So as I said, interdisciplinary variation. There's also been, a growing recognition of non-state actors. And there's been a great push for creating event databases or collecting oral histories, but those haven't necessarily fully been integrated yet. And there's been a push to get to do that. So I guess I'll leave it with a few points in terms of what we would be hoping for and what we'd be calling on CSW member states to do. One of the things would be to recognize gender data and evidence collected by non-state actors, including community-led grassroots actors, in a context like the Arctic, where sample sizes are extremely small, communities are very small. There's, a history of data collection that has been fraught due to colonization. It's also integral for states to recognize that communities have their own ways of collecting data and that they have their own observation systems that often includes gender knowledge. And so it's critical to prioritize methods that actually are able to integrate and link Indigenous and scientific knowledge. Encouraging official registers and statistics to collect gender and sex disaggregated data would be huge for the Arctic context, and also what's needed is sustained and robust funding. I think everybody here would agree with that. We all see that. And just building capacity. We often work with scientists who really care to gather gender and sex disaggregated data, but they don't know where to start. And so it's about capacity building and training folks to be able to do the work that they also want to do. They just don't know how to do it. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tahnee. That was really inspiring. We all deal with small communities and really scarce information, and it's really, really important to put the focus on collecting it and making it available and share it with other organizations too, so we can grow together. Next, I'm going to pass it on to Rosalind from UN Women, Rosalind Hefland from UN Women, and Claudia Rubio from JEDA.
Thank you so much, Ivana. And okay, so now we're going to pass on to a new section of today's session. And thank you all for all the speakers. The panel was so great. And it was like, yeah, it was amazing to hear like all of the insights, all of the nuance that you're working, that you're demonstrating in your work with data. So now we're going to jump into an interactive session. So the idea is also to really hear from all the participants here today and to just be able to like have a space for conversation, to some of those questions that we're seeing in the chat, to really be able to have a space to like discuss them and see what our common points are and our common challenges are, and that way make our collective advocacy much stronger. I'm going to be co-facilitating the section with my colleague Rosalind as well. And for this section, please feel free, Karen is putting right now the link in the Mentimeter, so please feel free to use the Mentimeter. Here you'll see like it's a more interactive tool, so you can add your thoughts to the questions. You can write down what you think, or you can also come off mute if you prefer to like speak it out loud, or you can also put it in the chat as well. Like this, the idea is to really have like a session where we can discuss like key points together. So, and there we're having the sharing of the Mentimeter. And you can see the link there. It should be relatively straightforward. You just click on the link and then it'll take you there, I'm pretty sure. And there's a translation as well, so you can also access it in your preferred language. Okay, so for the first question of the Mentimeter, the first question is, and you can use that, you can also go to mentimeter.com and use the code that you can find on the screen. First question is, what are the biggest challenges grassroots and feminist groups face in having their data recognized and used now and into the future? You can also see the translation in the page of the Mentimeter. So here we have several options. These are limited options and we recognize that, but the idea is more like to get kind of like find a similar tone throughout our work. So here we have lack of funding. So if you don't have resources, funding, yeah, like we're talking more like monetary, financial support. Resistance from the institutions, or at the same time, thinking about resistance also as lack of support, not enough like channels to, for example, face bureaucracy. This like may vary a lot depending on national context as well. Then we have a lack of standardized methodologies. Then we have preferences of quantitative versus qualitative data. So for example, thinking also of preference of quantitative and qualitative data, but also thinking a lot of what our panelists were saying today, like the type of data, like when other types of data are not really valued. So for example, storytelling or mapping, like affective mapping or feminist participatory action research. Like these are different types of data and data collection methods that many times are not valued. And finally, we have others as well. And thank you so much. We're seeing a lot of answers there in the Menti, a lot of lack of funding, Yeah, a lack of standardized methodologies. If anybody wants to come off mute as well, please. I see. Please let me know as well. I see more answers coming in. Okay, then I think, Rosalind, if you want to take on the next question.
All right, thank you, Claudia. And once again, I'm Rosalind Helfand from UN Women, and I have the honor of advising the FACJ Action Coalition, or Feminist Action for Climate Justice. So our next question is, what actions would most help to support grassroots-led gender data collection and use efforts? So collection and use. And here, I think it's really important to just get your feelings about what is most pressing for you. And I want to note that the responses to these questions and the comments that you have, we're going to use that to inform our next discussion, which will be in person at CSW on March 21st and beyond. So your responses today are actually, this isn't just a fun exercise for the audience, but it's really important to learn from you today. So the options that we have include funding, once again. We also have recognition by institutions. So do you feel like you're not, by not getting enough recognition for the importance of this work or the collection work that's being done, or perhaps it's about capacity to the work, that without recognition for those things, that you're not able to achieve what you'd like to achieve for gender and environment data. The next option is on partnerships with states and other actors, which could be partnerships with other community or grassroots organizations or NGOs, international organizations. So is partnerships what you really need to help further your work on data? Or does it really just come down to capacity as the next option, and all the different ways that we need capacity, lack capacity? And of course, this isn't just about building capacity from the ground up, but being able to continuously develop our capacity. Do we have the staff that we need to have? Those are all important questions. Or you can submit your own answer, which I think is really important too, is to be able to hear from you what other things you think that we might be missing from these options. So I see that funding is continuously coming out ahead, but what's really, really interesting here is that funding goes together pretty clearly with capacity here. And I think a lot of times funding is a capacity issue, but capacity is not limited to funding. So that's really interesting to see. With some posting about recognition for by institutions being important. Actually, a lot. So funding, recognition, and capacity are coming out on top, with partnerships being next. It seems pretty evenly distributed in some ways, except for other, but let's go over to Claudia for, I think we have one final question.
Thank you so much, Rosalind. We have two more, if I'm not mistaken. This one would be the third question that says, I think, Matt, if we could go to the next one. I think in screen we have the second one now. Thank you, Sophie. I see your comment in the chat also of decolonizing the data collection. Yeah, they now have space in the other section. Feel free to also write directly in the chat. So we're taking note of all of this. So what specific policy changes are needed to ensure community-led or gender data is valued in decision-making? Here we have official recognition, so recognizing that community-led data is valuable, inclusion in national reporting, integration in international agreements, direct funding for community-led monitoring, and other. And please feel free to write the other in the chat. So here we see a vast majority of people are indicating the direct funding for community-led monitoring. So very aligned also to the first question, that needing that financial support and needing that really that financial muscle to be able to like produce the data that we want to produce. We also see official recognition, so across the board, and I think this applies to all sectors, not only to across to all sectors, like really valuing that, for example, that citizen generated data or that community led gender data. So yeah, really appreciate here the difference. And we also see a lot of inclusion in national reporting. So we can also highlight, for example, how community-led data is frequently not included, for example, in the nationally determined contributions, so in the NDCs, or not frequently considered in like a lot of the big workspaces that we are. So yeah, really see that reflected there. And finally, we'll pass on to the fourth question. Rosalind?
Great. So the final question is an open-ended question. So this is an opportunity to really consider a little bit more what you want to say. What's an example where community-driven gender data has influenced synergistic gender environment policy and action? So how have you seen, just in your day-to-day work, or it could be something that you've observed in the greater world, that you think is really important to inform this discussion, where you saw data that was coming up from the community really being used in some way or making a difference for linking gender and environment in decision making, in writing policies, and in taking actions on those, whether it's in programs or projects or in other ways. All right, so this is great. So the environment, social, and the ESG data project from women in these coastal villages documented their daily reliance on mangroves for income and household needs. The data revealed that 70% of small-scale fishers and crab collectors were women. It's great. In Nepal, a remarkable forest has been managed by communities. There is a mandatory provision of gender inclusion. This enhances the leadership role of women and other marginal people. These are great examples. I'm wondering, is it possible for those in charge of the Menti to scroll down a little bit? Great, thank you. In Cameroon, women organized a town hall with policymakers to share with them their views, thoughts on the evacuation plan and proposed suggestions. Result was inclusion of women to the subsequent plan. These are really, really great examples from the ground level. We are working with 4 farmer and pastoralist organizations on advancing women's rights to communal land, with the results being used at different levels where they will hopefully have an impact. Fantastic. These are such great examples, and I'm so excited that we're capturing these in advance of March 21st, but also for future consideration. And Claudia, I think we can perhaps try to take some questions from the chat, or to take some additional comments. And I'm not sure if we can have folks unmute, but perhaps we can try that out.
Thank you, Rosalind. I think actually we have great news. One of our last panelists, Ketty, arrived a little bit later. So if that's okay, I can pass on to Ivana so she can pass on the word to Ketty as well. That sounds good.
Yes, thank you so much. I love Menti, and how people are participating. It was great. And the need for funding, I think, is one of the main highlights here, but also a lot of support from institutions, and articulation between organizations is also key. And going back to the panel that we had before on grassroots perspectives, we had our last speaker, Ketty Marcelo. She's president of the Organización Nacional de las Mujeres Indígenas Andinas y Amazónicas del Perú. And she has some floor minutes to speak with us about her experience in. Ketty, you can start.
It says good morning. Hello to everyone here from Peru. For us from UNAMYAP, it's very important to participate. What I was saying was that for us, it's very important to participate. We come from the Participar organization in the Global Data Forum. And in a political context that we, as women and indigenous peoples, a context that we face to recover our rights and data is very important because we indigenous peoples have to go from invisibility to being within the statistics, within data. But how do we do it? Somebody was saying decolonizing data or information gathering. That's also very important for us. So precisely because they have always wanted to invisibilize us, wipe us off, wipe us out. They don't consider the points of view of the indigenous peoples. For example, during the pandemic, there was no data on indigenous peoples. For us, that's very important precisely. And more than anything, how do we gather this data? No? One of the questions that we were being asked is what are some of the challenges that we face to be able to gather this data? Well, we are aware of the importance of data gathering, but for us, it's very hard in this context that we're in as a country and here in Latin America. Another thing is also that the ones who collect data may understand the cosmovision. How do the indigenous people see things? For us in the territory, everything has life. If we lose a sacred site, if we lose a body of water, the impact for us is alive. It is a being. It is life that is there. So in terms of data collection, for us, it's concerning because sometimes that's not considered. For you, it may be a rock, but for us, it's somebody. It is a sacred site. So that's a great challenge to understand from the outside. And another challenge is in public policy making to gather this data. And again, I say that we as indigenous people, for us, it's a source of rights. For us to be counted, for all this information to be collected is very important. Yeah, we, for example, need financial support to be able to continue collecting this data. From ONAMYAP, we have the experience of having participated or um, also launched the question of in Peru for for ethnic self-identification for the first time in history. It's taken us about 3 years to build a question so that we can be considered as indigenous peoples, because before 2017, when indigenous peoples claimed our rights, they would ask us, where are you? How many are you? Who are you? And in a country as colonial as Peru, it's very hard for somebody to self-identify as an indigenous people. So for us, participating and building this question for ethnic self-identification has been key. Thereafter, Arges worked the result in the 2617 census. The result was that 25% of the national population in Peru self-identified as part of an indigenous people. So the peoples, we already thought, okay, we're going to have rights to education, intercultural education, health, political participation. Another experience that we have as NAMIAP is the Navegador Indígena, which is a global platform. What we do is we take community surveys, we go down to the communities, and we also see it in the framework of the Declaration of the United Nations for Indigenous Peoples' Rights. So we take collective data on how policies are not arriving and how the indigenous people are being violated. So these are, collectively speaking, these are community surveys. And afterwards, together, we create small seed projects, small funds at a community level. And then we also bring that information to the global platform called Navegador Indígena. This is done by us indigenous women. with the support of the whole community. So that is what we have been working on from ONAMIAP. And also we keep in mind the uh, the 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 recovering and the sharing of our historical memory. So what we saw, for example, with the Indigenous Navigator was that the questions were very Western. There were questions that that made no sense for our community. So we had to recreate the questions with our siblings in the community to rewrite the questions. So within the conclusions, I know that I only have a couple minutes. So we from ONAMIAP, to improve data collection, we have some proposals. One of them is to do prior workshops in the community about their collective rights, right? For our siblings to know the rights, both individually and collectively, what is self-determination, so that they can also have access to their budgets and to lead in creating the communitary diagnostics. That's what we call it, community diagnostics. And that's another way for them to be able to participate. Another one is to identify priority aspects on their situation that requires urgent action. That they also prepared their own projects after systematizing the diagnostic results. They identify data priorities that need to be incorporated in statistics, in census, in registries from the perspectives of our own peoples, to strengthen capacities in terms of the rights of the communities. It's very important as well. And to ensure participation and representation of the peoples, of indigenous peoples, in definition and planning of politics and political processes. For us, intergenerational participation is very important for us, because the diagnostic community diagnostics have to include the participation of the elderly, of the youth. That's very important for us as an organization. And the main proposal of ONAMIAP, it says, why do we do this community diagnostic? Precisely because we want to create structural changes that help us to promote a better whole political horizon. Because for us, to be intercultural for us is not enough. We want to be able for our different insights to be recognized as a plurinational country, no, to break with colonialism and to build a a plurinational state, a multinational state, from the voices of our peoples, from our communities. Thank you. Ivana says, thank you so much, Katie. Super, super interesting. I'm going to switch to English now because I got to moderate.
Katie, it was so powerful. I think with all these different experiences that you are sharing, we can see that there is no unique manual or methodology for gender data and environment or climate change. We would love to have one book for everyone, but it's impossible, and it will lose all the different aspects of the uniqueness of each territory and each community. So I think that that's a huge challenge that we all have, how to make our data and experiences conversate and exchange experiences, and how to make it interoperable in some regions at least. So now I will pass it on to Jessamine Encarnacion. Jessamine is the Regional Advisor on Gender Statistics from Asia Pacific UN Women.
Yeah, thank you. And good day, everyone. I'm seeing, yes. Okay. So today I would like to highlight efforts by state and non-state actors in establishing clear frameworks for collecting, managing, and using gender and environment statistics. They are crucial in strengthening data governance and coordination, both on the official as well as on citizen data sources, to drive meaningful policy impact. Next slide, please. Historically, environment data has focused on ecosystems, overlooking human interactions, and particularly gendered impacts. So it is a must that integrating gender disaggregated environment data so that we can ensure that women's roles, vulnerabilities, and contributions to environmental sustainability are recognized and measured. Therefore, Women Count, UN Women's Global Gender Data Program, has led efforts together with other partners to develop gender and environment indicators and methodologies to support countries in closing these data gaps. They are systematically collected from diverse sources, whether it's the surveys, censuses, administrative records, big data, and equally important, citizen data, allowing for more comprehensive analysis and evidence-based policymaking. Next slide, please. Therefore, in response to member states' needs, UN Women and partners developed a list of gender and environment indicators to track progress on global and national frameworks. This list has expanded to 100 indicators, sourced from whether it's the national surveys or geospatial data or citizen data. And many are already part of the SDG and Sendai frameworks, with others under review for global monitoring. Next slide, please. So UN Women now supports countries with the implementation of standalone gender and environment surveys. So these standalone surveys sample two adults in each household to capture the perspectives of both women and men in households. So they cover all sorts of environmental topics, whether from impacts and preparedness for disasters to impacts and adaptation to climate change, to a wide variety of environmental livelihoods, green jobs, and environmental decision-making, among many others. A suite of tools is available for all NSOs who wish to implement these national surveys. The surveys have been complemented or are underway in the countries in the blue box. Next slide, please. These are some examples of statistics that can be derived from the surveys, which showcase differences in access to early warning information and sources used. That's one that you can see on the left-hand side of your screen, experience from Tonga, and differences in impacts, in this case, giving up food in times of scarcity, more likely to be done by women, which you can see on the right side of your screen from Samoa experience. Next slide, please. GIS, next slide, please. GIS is also a critical information source for environmental analysis. UN Women has conducted extensive analysis by integrating geospatial data and various forms of GIS. See, for instance, the yellow circles on the right-hand side of your screen. So, for instance, the map on the left shows a correlation between the child marriage rates, represented by the block dots, and aridity, lighter dots that are more humid areas. UN Women also trains NSOs to help them conduct this analysis to fill gender environment data gaps. Next slide. And of course, there are also other solutions to fill these data gaps. Administrative data has also been used to fill gender environment gaps. For instance, UN Women partnered with Pacific Power Utilities to examine the share of women in different positions working in these utility firms. Big data has also been leveraged for environmental analysis. For instance, UN Women analyzed Google search data to examine changes in trends related to help seeking online during and after disasters. And finally, of course, the focus of my presentation is on the citizen data, which offers tremendous opportunities to fill gender and environment data gaps. And let me share with you some examples and the framework to showcase the strength of citizen data that we have been working on. Next slide. So the collaborative on citizen data, this has been launched in 2020-30. It was under the UN Statistical Commission. So the Statistical Commission usually happens just 1 week before the CSW. So it brings together diverse stakeholders to promote the power of citizen data. So governed by a 10-member steering committee, it developed the Copenhagen Framework on Citizen Data, which is a practical guide to integrating citizen contributions into the broader data ecosystem. So the framework defines citizen data, highlights NSO's roles, and lays out a roadmap for sustainable implementation. And the recently concluded UN Statistical Commission just last week has actually endorsed and approved the framework on citizen data, which basically is a great achievement in terms of member states, chief statisticians or NSOs from national statistical systems, recognizing the power and value of citizen data in the broader data ecosystem. Next slide, please. So citizen data obviously involves meaningful citizen engagement across the data value chain, promoting inclusive and ethical data use, whether or not integrated into official statistics. So we needed that quote-unquote standardization of definitions and concepts through the framework to ensure that we have common understanding across different partners within the ecosystem, whether from both state and non-state actors. It has long been a powerful tool for advancing gender equality, helping CSOs, communities, and researchers to highlight disparities and drive advocacy. Recently, NSOs and development partners, including those in our Global Gender Data Program Women Count, have increasingly recognized its value, further advancing the citizen data agenda. For example, chief statisticians from Georgia, from Senegal, approaching us in terms of how can we work more on citizen data in our regular operations within the National Statistical System. Next slide. So the principles behind citizen data collection and use, especially for marginalized populations and communities, are critical when working with them. Therefore, in the framework, in the Copenhagen framework, developed through global and community consultations, it sets out 13 key principles. It actually started from 8 to 10, and now we're up to 13 key principles with thanks to the voices as well as comments from our partners from the communities, like independence, participation, transparency, and data security, particularly from the indigenous, from the IPs. They have underscored data sovereignty and self-determination in this case to ensure an ethical data governance and protect marginalized communities. Next slide, please. Also, as part of that Copenhagen framework, a strong enabling environment was also identified as key to bringing the framework to life. This institutional perspectives highlights how statistical offices can foster inclusive and sustainable data ecosystems by engaging and empowering citizens and other non-state actors. So the framework outlines 8 key areas shown on your screen to support this transformation. Next slide. So just sharing with you some examples, zooming into Brazil's experience in their geological survey, local communities contributed to environmental data by recording daily rainfall at 7 a.m. and river levels at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. This citizen data complemented official statistics, strengthening data ecosystems, and fostering community ownership, shared responsibility, as well as empowerment. Next slide. In Ghana, a policy roundtable on SDG 14.1.1b, or plastic debris density, united civil society, academia, and government to explore citizen science and integrate findings into Ghana's Oceans Plan, strengthening partnerships and existing networks, ensuring more efficient, inclusive, and locally owned data collection for impactful policies. Next slide, please. Indigenous women often face exclusion from climate decision-making despite their key role in ecosystems. So the WOMER project in Colombia enabled them to collect climate impact data and advocate for policies. A mobile app supported real-time data collection while strengthened networks and advocacy, ensuring their voices influence climate governance. And just on the side, I think during the Statistical Commission also last week, we had a chat with the chief statistician of Colombia, of Colombia's NSO, or National Statistics Office. They have likewise shared with us that for the first time, because in the past, whenever they collect their surveys, that portion of the Amazon areas within Colombia are often excluding indigenous populations whenever they do data collection. Only in more recent surveys that they have now deliberately included data collection from indigenous peoples in the Amazon, and likewise making sure that gender differentiated impacts as well as situation are likewise included in their data collection. Next slide. Participatory approaches to gender data engage often overlooked groups like civil society and indigenous populations, empowering them to contribute as co-creators of evidence. This is central to our joint work with OECD Paris 21 in developing the participation for transformation, or the P4T model as we would call it. That by leveraging complementary strengths, state and non-state actors can collaborate throughout the data value chain by engaging them, involving them, as well as empowering them to improve gender data uptake and drive progress on gender equality. Next slide. So please feel free to scan the QR codes displayed on your screen to learn more about gender and environment data resources that UN Women have recently developed. We also would like to connect with you, as we would like to compile good practices, challenges, or learning on gender and citizen data that some of you have already been working on. I mean, we have already, before me, great speakers sharing practical experiences as well as challenges. And definitely, we hope that, that going beyond this webinar, we hope to continue the connection with the rest of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have some questions for the panelists of the grassroots perspective panels, and a lot of really, really interesting questions today in the chat and in the QA. So for the panelists, we have Rachel, Zoneziwoh, Sadia, Tahnee, and Ketty. I have a question for you that if you want to answer, you can answer in a few minutes, like 2-3 minutes maximum, because we don't have a lot of time, but we saw like something in common in most of the questions. So could you share some challenges in gathering local data or gender disaggregated data in your experience? How did you overcome them? And also, there is a question for Ketty that I'm going to share it with all of you. Could you explain your approaches and experiences and how data can include both individual perspectives and collective perspective, not only men and women or diversities as individuals, but also as collectives. So if some of you want to share your experiences, you have about 2 minutes each to answer some of these questions. So Rachel, if you are still here, if you want to answer.
Yes, I'm happy to answer. Can you hear me?
Perfect. Yes, we can hear you.
I can hear another language. Just confirm you can hear me. Excellent. Thank you, Ivana. Yes, I think one of the challenges that I can share is what we have said, and I think the previous speakers have also talked about, is being able to recognize citizen-generated data or alternative data to be recognized. And so what GROOTS Kenya has been doing, we've worked together with other civil society organizations in the country to be able to meet with Kenya National Bureau of Statistics to be able to lobby for the acceptance of citizen-generated data so that we will have the official data, but then also let's complement it from the grassroots perspective, from the lived realities, from diverse expertise. And there's already a process in terms of setting up a technical committee to be able to have a framework that be able to give the standardization of data that is collected from the citizen and from the non-state actors. I think I'll stop at that.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the resuming of everything in short time. We really appreciate it. Zoneziwoh, if you want to go next.
Yes, for sure. I mean, in Cameroon, what we do is, which, has been a success, and it's something that I think, the state kind of like is taking it on board, is the fact that each time, there is a validation process by the government, they invite the women of this community to validate the findings that have been done, and they bring in their own perspective, their realities, and there may be a report that says, for instance, I would always take that example of flood. Say during the flood incident, women were provided with humanitarian kits, and the women were like, no, we did not see that. So, that also is part of accountability and verification, and also participatory in terms of making things transparent. So this is something that we currently do with different policymakers. And I think it's a very good practice in terms of actually validating and, making data transparent and inclusive. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I will pass it on to Tahnee.
Yes, great points. To add to that, I think some of the things that we've done is to try and work with different research projects and researchers to also look at their agenda for the coming decade, for example, and trying to make sure that they do integrate a gender dimension into their work, whether that be a recognition that women's schedules, for examples, may not align with the schedules that they've traditionally worked with or that they plan around for their research projects, and actually creating spaces for people to participate, to getting them to, do any type of training that would allow them to gather gender and sex disaggregated data that they may not have had, and just setting kind of a baseline of how to do that, which is not always the easiest, because people don't necessarily always think about humans when they develop services or when they develop different types of data programs. So yeah, putting a human face to it is critical.
Thank you so much, Tahnee. Now I will switch to Spanish.
Ketty, if you can answer the questions, thank you. Ketty says, okay, and I can speak for 30 seconds. Regarding the questions, yeah, for those who are going to get the data from communities, from indigenous peoples, it's important to know that for us, the indigenous peoples' individual rights cannot be separated from collective rights. For us, there is not a division between them. And for example, everyone has the right to the community. They harm Mother Nature, they harm us. So looking at it from that perspective, it's very important in the creation of data. I just wanted to say that.
Thank you so much. Gracias, Ketty. Thank you, everyone, for your answers. And now we will go to the closing remarks of this wonderful session. Now I will give the floor to Amelia Arreguin from CBD Women Caucus. So now you can start your presentation. Thank you, Amelia.
Ami says, thank you so much, Ivana, and thank you so much to all the compañeras that have shared their reflections. Honestly, it's always a challenge to give closing remarks after such a rich session in terms of experiences and in cases. So what I'm going to try to do is I identified 5 points where the intention is to bring them to the event that we have shared at the beginning that's going to take place in person during the CSW event. So as the first point, a call to action, I think that nothing from this that we're talking about could not happen. In fact, this conversation could not have happened had it not been without a transformation of the thinking or the focus or the way that we think of data. If there hadn't been a question or a questioning on the fact that data is not only scientific, or data can not only be built from a square perspective, but a more Cartesian way that has to follow a specific methodology. I think the first call to action, and I think that all of us who are here in this session share this view, we seek to bring this vision to other actors that still resist it. And it is that transformation of framings, how we think about data itself, the methodologies that we seek to build this reality. Because in the end, and I think at the beginning, that's what we should put at the beginning when we when we embark on data work. What are we trying to understand? What we're trying to understand is the reality that we're living in. And who do we consider, or who should this person responding be, or who should be the person describing this reality is what we're discussing here. And many of the panelists said it. It is the understanding that we inhabit from different cosmovisions, from different value systems, and mainly women because of the socialization that we have lived through, that we have grown up in, right? We have different ways of thinking, different ways of thinking, of acting that have very often been invisibilized. But having understood that difference allows us to go one step forward. And that's when we can think of more practical things. For example, yes, the 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 urgent need to have financial resources so that institutions can train themselves. Very often we talk about capacity development for communities, but in reality, the ones that need to transform themselves are the statistics offices, or the national information systems. Those are the spaces where we also need to invest resources for that transformation to take place. That definitely goes hand in aligned with giving financial resources so that communities from their own freedom can decide on how to measure this reality and how to communicate it as well. I think an important part that was mentioned is that the many formats on how this data that's being built can be shared and using it. And I'm gonna close with data use, because very often we talk about generating data, building data, sharing technological resources, and even trainings. But if this data is truly going to be used in policies, in health policies, financial policies, environmental policies, I think that's another call to action, to recognize data, which wouldn't be alternative data, but just from other sources, but for this data to be incorporated in decision-making processes at a national and international level. We are also linking with these international spaces where different decisions and actions are negotiated at a global level, and very often they are blind to the more local realities. I would stay here in this point about the acknowledgement and use of data in different spheres. Thank you, Ivana. Ivana says, thank you so much, Amelia. Super interesting. I'm going to switch to English now.
And I will give the floor to Kidir Idris from the Institute of Climate Change and Environmental Governance. Kidir, the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ivana. Thank you very much, colleagues and friends, and for your powerful contributions today. It has been an honor to be part of these critical discussions. As we conclude, data sovereignty, collaborations, and visibility has stand out as the three pillars. From Cameroon to Peru, we have seen how grassroots data transforms lived realities into policy imperatives. If today's conversations reaffirms a fundamental truth that data is power. Power to inform policy, power to drive action, power to ensure that voices and lived realities of women and gender diverse people are not just heard, but recognized and acted upon. But before we depart, I would like to spotlight. As I said, before we depart, I want to spotlight the collective force behind today's discussion, the Gender and Environmental Data Alliance, co-founded in 2021 by the International Union for Conservation of Nature, Women's Environment and Development organization, and 15 other pioneers. GIDA has been built not to only explore data landscapes, but to expand it, evaluating diverse perspectives, including traditional and indigenous knowledge, and feminist participatory action research. Today, GIDA unites about 60 institutional members 21 data advisory experts, with about 61 based in the global south here, about 59 working locally or internationally. This growth is intentionally. We center those most impacted to drive equitable solutions. GIDA don't just want to fill data gaps. We want to use data to catalyze gender-responsive climate actions, from unpaid care works to biodiversity loss. This feminist lens ensures no lived experience is erased. Our discussions today have made it clear that non-state actors, including grassroots organizations, must be recognized as key contributors to gender environmental data landscapes. Their insights and lived experiences are essential to shaping meaningful policies and actions. A whole of society approach is critically needed. We must bridge official data with community-driven experience to ensure decision-making reflects realities on the ground. Investment in grassroots organization is essential. Providing resources for data collection and analysis empowers communities to monitor, advocate, and drive transformative changes. Data sovereignty must be upheld. Respecting diverse knowledge systems creates a fairer, more accurate understanding of gender climate synergies. All these themes are not new. The Beijing Platform for Action about 30 years ago recognized the need for robust gender environment data. Its strategic objective still remains clear: strengthen mechanisms to access the impact of development and environmental policies on women and gender diverse people. Yet, as Rachel, the speakers, reminded us that invisibility remains a crisis. As we move forward, let's ensure that the Beijing Plus 30 review is built on robust, inclusive, and actionable data, data that informs policy, shapes investment, and leads to real change. This conversation does not end here. We invite you all on this month 21st to take today's grassroots insights to policymakers at the in-person side events. We invite all you participants to join on this in-person to translate community-led data into institutional actions, demand that member states integrate non-state evidence in global frameworks, and strengthen synergy across the Rio Conventions, the NDCs, and then NAPs. Also, to our speakers, co-organizers, and each of you, thank you very much. Keep pushing with GIDA. I invite you to follow our work, join our alliances, and hold decision makers accountable. Your voices, insights, and advocacy will be crucial in ensuring that gender environment data remains at the heart of decision making. Together, we are not just closing data gaps, we are building a world where every voice shapes climate solutions. So on behalf of GIDA and the steering committee, thank you very much for your dedication, engagement, and commitment to advancing a more just and sustainable future. Let's keep pushing forward from grassroots to global with courage and collective. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone, for being here, for your time and your knowledge. And with this, we are wrapping up this session. It will be recorded and it will be shared. And thank you so much.